Okay, Ephesians chapter 6. Now remember, Paul has already said that we need to make the most of every opportunity to stand for truth and to present the truth. And Paul is saying here that one of the most powerful ways we have of witnessing is being Christ-like in our relationships. Hey, Gary, come on in, have a seat. So it's being Christ-like in our relationships, particularly as we have seen, submission and love in our relationships. Last week we talked about the marriage relationship, and as it was mentioned last week, there are two more relationships that Paul highlights here in the first part of Ephesians chapter 6. So let's read verses 1 through 4. It says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." So this starts out addressing children who are dependent on their parents. And it says that they are to obey. Now remember, wives were told to submit to their husbands, which we said means to voluntarily place yourself under or acquiesce to. But this is a different word. And this means to hear under, literally. It means to do what you hear them say. And this assumes that the child is a believer because Paul says this obedience is part of their walk with the Lord. Paul supports this by pointing them to the 10 Commandments, particularly the 5th commandment. He says there, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Now, when Paul quotes that, he quotes that from the Septuagint. And the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. So if you were to flip back to Exodus chapter 20 or Deuteronomy chapter 5, where you find the 10 Commandments, it doesn't read exactly as it says here in Ephesians. But Paul is quoting the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Why would Paul quote the Septuagint? Now think about what we've got going on and who we've got in Ephesus. Yeah, right. The church is made up of Jews and Greeks. And so he quotes from the Septuagint because that is the word that they have access to. That's a word that they might know. That's the word that includes them. That includes them. So there are so many Gentiles in the Ephesian church, and this quote includes them. And then Paul, the first part of that, he speaks to the kids. He flips the relationship to address the parents. And specifically, he addresses the fathers. In the Roman world, the fathers were primarily responsible for the discipline and correction of the children. Philo was a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher. Hellenistic just means that he kind of had the Greek mindset. He lived the Greek lifestyle, but he was a Jew and he was a philosopher. And he wrote this. He said that the father is responsible for the discipline of the children. And this is what he said: to scold the child, rebuke him, and should he not obey cautionary words, to beat him. Okay, a little bit of a different world back then, right? But it was the father's responsibility. But Paul doesn't say, if your kid won't listen, beat him. That's not what Paul says here, right? No. Paul tells, in fact, he actually commands the fathers not to exasperate their children. Not to exasperate their children. And that word means don't be so harsh or demanding or unreasonable or heavy-handed that the child becomes frustrated and angry. Is there any job harder than being a parent? So he says here, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Don't frustrate them. Don't be so harsh and hard and demanding that they become frustrated, discouraged, depressed, resentful. Instead, he says, so this means as opposed to treating a child too harshly, instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And here it is a command to cherish. to nourish, to raise up. And there are two thoughts here. The first is training. Training. And that means to raise them up with instruction and correction. Okay, so kind of it's two-pronged approach. I'm going to teach you and tell you and show you how you should go. And when you don't follow that, there's going to be some correction that happens. Okay? And then the second thing he says is instruction, and that means verbal correction. Okay? So that means talking to them. That means confronting an issue when it needs to be confronted. Okay? If you're familiar with what's called nouthetic counseling, okay? It's the word nouthetic there. And most importantly is that this is all rooted in the gospel and in a relationship with Jesus Christ. He says, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Remember where it says in Deuteronomy that you're supposed to talk with your kids about God when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. He's just supposed to be such a natural part of our life that we just are constantly showing and communicating him to the kids. Okay? And so this means that our relationship with Jesus Christ is at the core of who we are and what we want for our children.